let's turn on mute. I know you said that. If they thought you did it on purpose. All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the right place. For those of you who are working, you're welcome to tune in. We are doing a workshop today on how to edit yourself. And I'm sure this was such an exciting topic. Everyone was anxious to come, but just couldn't be here because of something else. But we're going to talk a little bit today about probably everyone's least favorite thing to talk about, actually, which is grammar and punctuation. But the goal here is not just to talk about the rules of grammar and punctuation, but how to help you kind of navigate and identify in your own writing errors that maybe are easy to trip us up, and hopefully we'll give you some strategies for how you can identify those errors and then fix them as well. Now, obviously, we can't talk about everything, but we're trying to hit on those that tend to make the biggest impact in our writing. So we'll see how we do. All right, so let's first of all begin with just establishing what it is that we're actually talking about when we say proofreading and editing. So proofreading is the process of looking at sentences, word choices, grammar issues, logic, etc. in greater detail in order to find mistakes and errors. A lot of times, though, when we think of proofreading, we're only thinking about those grammatical type things. But proofreading is also about looking at the whole thing and thinking about whether or not I'm saying what I mean in this piece. So it's not just grammar that you're looking at when you're proofreading, but it's the whole thing and how everything is working together. And then, of course, editing is the actual process of correcting those. A lot of times students come into the right place and they say, hey, I need you to edit my paper. And we're like, no, we're not going to do that. Because the editing is the actual work of fixing. And our goal is to not do that for you, but to show you how to do that, which is also what we're doing today. It's important to not skip the proofreading and editing. Sometimes we want to just write that paper and print it off and send it in and hope for the best. But we typically get the better outcome when we take a little time to proofread, to read over, to think through what it is that we have put down in order to make it clear and to fulfill the purpose that we have. So with that in mind, I want to talk about the editing roadmap, which is the process that you should follow even before you get to the stage of editing and proofreading. We have to understand, first of all, what the expectations are for this piece that we have written. That will actually guide what we look for when we read back over it. We need to be aware of the resources that are available to us in order to do the work that we have before us. And it's very important to prepare and be very intentional about the work that we do before we even get to the point where we're ready to proof it or bring it to the writing center to be proofed, which is what we sometimes do. But when we talk about understanding expectations, we want to think about what it is that perhaps our teachers are looking for in a particular thing. They will have a certain standard of expectation, certain goals that they will set for you. If you're not sure how to meet those expectations, it may be necessary to look at examples that others have done as a way to follow that same format. Of course, teachers provide you with a syllabus that sometimes has those goals and standards laid out for you. Reviewing the assignment details and making sure you're even understanding what you're to do. A lot of times, students come in the Writing Center with an assignment and we'll say, okay, what is it that you have to do? And they'll go, I don't really know. Well, the first step is to really understand what it is that the teacher is asking you. And that's also what we can do here when you come in. And, I encourage everyone to not be afraid to ask. Sometimes that's the biggest hindrance to progress is our pride and our unwillingness to even ask for help. We don't want to ask the teacher. So maybe it's more comfortable to ask us, but we'll often encourage you to ask your teacher because sometimes that is the person who really knows even better than us. And so if you think about the resources that are available to you, keep in mind that they are many, but they also do require you at times to stretch outside your comfort zone if you're not the type of person who likes to ask. But if you are aware of some of the other resources, such as the Purdue OWL, which is often our go-to when we're helping you, teachers use it as well, especially English teachers. Purdue OWL has so much information, and it's laid out so easily to understand for formatting, for grammatical things, for style and documentation. So I encourage you to become familiar with the Purdue OWL. A&M's library has online databases and resources that are useful when you're pulling together a research paper. We will have a representative from the library here tomorrow, as a matter of fact, to show us how to navigate the library's resources. So I encourage you to come out for that. Dictionary and thesaurus, you know, we have these huge books here, the old-fashioned hard copy dictionaries, which are great. They have thousands of words in them. Really useful resource, but who has time to lug that around? If you're not able to get your hands on one of these, dictionary.com is your friend, and it is right in the palm of your hand, easy to access. I encourage you to familiarize yourself with that resource when you're looking for just the right word, or if you're not sure you've used a particular word in the right way. And then, of course, our website, which I can show when we get to the end, has resources as well. And I'm always trying to push you guys to our website because we work so hard to put those things out there. We have hard copy handouts here, but all of those are also available online in addition to other things. We have links to tutorials and videos as well. So we would love for you to familiarize yourself with the things that we've put out there for you. And, you know, when all else fails, there's always Google, but, you know, there's so many other resources besides Google. And we can talk another day about how to evaluate the things that we do find, because everything is not great that we Google, but there are some good resources available, particularly when you're looking for how to structure particular things, types of writing. If you're not sure about the format, but Google can give you those great examples as well. So preparation is important. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So planning is a key aspect of writing. When your writing is planned out before you begin, then you may have less to do by the end. So some key resources in planning. Now, this first one on the list is going to be dependent upon the type of writer you are. Each writer is unique, has their own individual style and approach to the writing process. And there's not just one right way. So if you've been taught that you must always create an outline before you write a paper, I am here to tell you that is absolutely wrong. You do not have to formulate an outline before you can write a good paper. Some writers, many of us, in fact, in this very room, actually cannot write that way. So if you're the type of person who has to kind of get your ideas down on paper first, then an outline is not going to even be possible for you. So remember that writing is a process. Each of us has our individual way that we approach that process, and there's no one right way. All we have to do is, by the end, have an organized, logical, well-written piece, but how we get there may be varied depending on the type of person we are. So if you're able to create an outline first, if that's the process that works for you, by all means do it. Some of us have to do the outline after we've kind of just done the brain dump onto the page and stuff is everywhere, and we are trying to figure out how to rework it. And I have a handout on the reverse outline if you're interested in that as well. But it is a tool. Outlining is a tool. It is a way to be able to sort of organize your thoughts and make sure that they do flow one from the other. Creating a strong thesis, though, is kind of a non-negotiable. Although I always say that in the early stages of your writing process, think of it more as a working thesis. It's kind of the point that you want to make that will guide everything else that you do and say in the paper, but be flexible enough in that process to know it may need to be tweaked or refined once you've sort of fleshed out the points that you're trying to make. And that's where the whole proofreading and editing comes in, because as you look back at what you've said, you'll say, oh, you know what, my thesis is maybe not lining up as well with what I've actually written, and one or the other may need to be changed. Students a lot of times are like, oh, I gotta change the 3 pages that I wrote because it doesn't fit with my thesis. Wouldn't it be easier just to revise your thesis? to fit with the 3 pages that you wrote, right? So remember that the process is flexible, it's not rigid, and then you'll be able to do what you need to do. In order to do that, though, you got to have time. And I think that's where we get into trouble, because we don't give ourselves enough time to do that process and to free ourselves from having to have it perfect the first time through. So I encourage you to give yourself plenty of time to work through your own process so that it won't be quite as stressful. So follow through is important. Don't just talk about it, be about it. I know you're gonna leave here and be like, oh, I'm gonna be real organized from now on when I write my papers, but you have to really commit to that and be intentional when you think about your writing assignments and tasks. It's important to not be lax and lazy and procrastinate. You have to really be intentional. All right, so now can I edit is the question. Perhaps you've written your outline, consulted your resources, formulated your thesis, found your supporting sources, and written your first draft. Now what? So proofreading and editing your own work can sometimes be a daunting task because the important thing is knowing what to look for. And maybe you've written a whole bunch and you need to come talk to us because you have no idea if there are grammatical errors or disjointed sentences. So what we're talking about today is how you might begin to identify those things a little more easily in your own writing. Not that we don't want you to come get help from us. We can certainly still assist you. But the more that you can begin to identify those things yourself, the stronger you'll be as a writer and the more comfortable you'll feel with the writing process. So first of all, let me just say that when it comes to proofing and editing, as I mentioned before, you want to start big and work your way down to the smaller things. If you're in the midst of your writing process, don't stop and edit the commas. Because if you're still working through what it is you're trying to say, changing a comma here or there is ridiculous, waste of time, because that sentence may go away completely. Or you may completely take that paragraph out or rework it entirely in order to make the main idea clear. So think about what is the main point that you're trying to write and get that sort of figured out first. Don't hamstring yourself by, oh, somehow the sentence isn't flowing well. Because if you don't have a main point, it really doesn't matter. Then after you have that main point, see whether or not those supporting details are there, whether or not you've actually fleshed out the why, how, and in what ways is that main point true. Have you proven or shown all the things that you said? Or have you just sort of repeated the same main point over and over again in different ways, right? So you want to kind of look at that first. Providing concrete examples whenever possible. Sometimes we think that academic writing is all about the big idea. It's about the big idea, but it's also about connecting it to something tangible, something that is more specific and easily able to understand. Your big ideas are clearer when you show how, why, and in what ways, and provide those tangible examples. Then, once all of those other pieces are pretty much in place, you're coming down to the end of your time with this particular project, then you can kind of look at some of the smaller issues in terms of the language and how your ideas have been put together. So here is a long list of things to look at when you're doing the editing work, once the bigger things are in place. One very important way to check yourself is to read it out loud, because I guarantee you, when you've spent some time with it, you know what you're trying to say, and you know what you mean, and so it will be very easy for you to read it back to yourself silently and fix all the things that maybe are there that shouldn't be. But if you, first of all, give yourself some space after writing it to come back to it and edit, you will also, by reading it to yourself out loud, you'll hear what it says, what you've said, and hear whether or not it sounds right, and whether the words are coming together, whether the words that are on the page are actually what you meant, right? And there's something about that audible hearing of the language rather than just seeing that will trigger your attention on those things that you particularly are doing incorrectly. You want to pay attention to those errors that happen frequently as well. If you know over and over again your sentences seem really choppy or really long and laborious, then that's a pattern that you want to try to address in your writing as a whole. And that's something that we work with you on as well. If we see patterns of errors, we'll usually address those first and figure out a way to help you fix those. In order for your writing to be more clear and easily read, avoiding repetition and unnecessary wordiness is important. Be aware of the tense of each of the verbs. Remember what a verb is, anything that shows action or state of being, right? And if you're talking about, if you're writing a paper for history, you're talking about things in the past, that means all of the verbs should be in the past. If you're talking about something that is ongoing or in the present, you have to be consistent with those verbs all remaining in that same tense. Keep in mind that you're writing for others, so don't assume that it's obvious the point that you're making, right? If you make a statement, then verify that statement. Give an example of that, of why it's true and how. Don't assume that it's obvious or that the reader will know. Again, that goes back to remembering your audience and keeping in mind the goals of this particular piece. A lot of times we take for granted that our teacher knows the subject because she's teaching the class, but she wants you to write the paper towards an audience that is not necessarily an expert. And so that will dictate how much you explain, how much detail you include. Add or delete information that is not pertinent. Again, that depends on the purpose and goal of the assignment. Did I put tense shift in there twice? I think I did. Check your sentence structure. We'll talk a little bit about that, whether the sentences are too long or too short, whether they are fragments or actual sentences. Transition words and phrases are so important. Help me understand how this point connects to the one you just made. Let's not just go march forward without ever looking back, because the paper is a complete whole, it's a unit. And the expectation is that everything that is in it is connected in some way. Again, don't assume that it's obvious, that connection. You want to use words and phrases that will actually show that. And there are ways to simplify sentences if they're getting a little laborious by first of all just extracting what the main subject and verb is in a sentence and going from there. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then, of course, depending on the transitions and the order, we may need to rearrange ideas. So let's talk about how to train your eye to identify particular errors. First and foremost, when we're looking at the sentences in our writing, if we identify prepositional phrases, sometimes that alone can be enough to identify what's going on in the sentence. What do we mean by prepositional phrases? We have a handout to remind you of what a prepositional phrase is, and this is a link which we can make available to you to a great resource on prepositional phrases. So first of all, who knows what a prepositional phrase is? Everybody's like, oh, don't look at me. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so those are the words that show direction, relation. Her definition is a prepositional phrase is a group of words consisting of a preposition, which we have a handout for you on what some of those are. Its object and any words that modify the object. We're going to talk about modifying phrases in just a minute. Most of the time, a prepositional phrase modifies a verb or a noun. These two kinds of prepositional phrases are called adverbial or adjectival. So let's look at our handout at some of the prepositions that are common. About, above, across, after, against, beneath, below, beside, on, to, of. So they are all about showing the relationship of ideas, whether they be nouns or verbs. And so in this, on this page, she talks about some of the ways in which prepositions function. So he arrived in time. So the phrase in time is the prepositional phrase, right? Because in is one of our prepositions. and time has to do with when he arrived. So that phrase in this sentence is a modifying phrase, and it modifies the verb in this case. So if we're looking at these sentences and we were to bracket off all of the phrases, the prepositional phrases rather, what we would be left with is the simple sentence, just the subject and the verb, right? So by bracketing in time, we're able to identify the subject and the verb. He arrived. If we bracket with that guy, which is our preposition, then the sentence is she really going out, right? So let's talk about this one. Is she really going out with that tall, gorgeous guy? Where is the prepositional phrase? You have the preposition handout, so there's some words that you know signal a preposition. And we know that a phrase is the preposition at the head and the words that follow it. So in that sentence, somebody tell me, what is the prepositional phrase? What's the preposition in this sentence? Let's start there. Is the preposition out? Is the preposition out? Not in this case. Why not? Why not? You know what? Because going out in this use is the thing itself. It's like, you know, you're going out. It's I don't know what the rule for that is. I don't know what the name of it is. Right. But it's colloquial, really, because that's just a phrase that we use and it includes a preposition. You're right. But we know that the meaning for going out is sort of a unit in and of itself. Right. In this case, with is the preposition that's actually functioning for the phrase with that tall, gorgeous guy. And so the subject is what? Who or what is the subject in this sentence? She. Right? She is doing something. It's a question too, so it's really a weird sentence to use as an example. But she is the subject. Is going out, I guess, would be the verb. And so by bracketing off the with that gorgeous guy helps us to isolate the main part of the sentence. Now, there's nothing wrong with the sentence. We're just looking at how to kind of break apart the sentence in order to identify what's left and to determine whether we have a subject or verb agreement. This one might be a little easier. The cat in the middle is the cutest. So the prepositional phrase is, what's the preposition? In. So the phrase is in the middle. Right. Gotta identify the preposition first. And so if we pulled out that phrase, we would be left with the cat is the cutest. Right? The cat is. So we're good. Subject and verb agree. All right? So that's mainly the point with that. If we pull out the prepositional phrase, then we're able to see the simple subject, verb, and complement. So in this case, for example, the boy with the heavy books looks like your brother. So if we were to do what we just did and identify the preposition in this sentence, which word is the preposition? With. And the phrase that accompanies that preposition is what? With the heavy books. So notice that books is plural. And so sometimes we get tripped up when there's a plural noun within the prepositional phrase, and we think it should modify, that and the verb should match. But in actuality, because it's a preposition, we pull that out in order to just determine the subject and the verb of the sentence. So if we pull out with the heavy books, what are we left with? The boy look or looks? Looks. At that point, we know that it has to be looks because the subject is boy. The boy looks like your brother. So taking out the prepositional phrase helps us to check whether the subject and the verb agree. All right, so another thing that we can pull out of a sentence is the subordinate or dependent clause. So that sounds really fancy, right? Subordinate. What does subordinate mean? It means dependent. It means, you have to sort of bow to something else. And in this case, it means that it's a phrase that can't stand alone in meaning. It depends on the main clause. Dependent or subordinate clauses always have markers, just like the prepositional phrase always begins with that preposition. Subordinate clauses always begin with what we call a dependent clause marker. For example, while, when, if, because, and after. Those are probably not the only ones, but there's just examples of dependent clause. Whenever you see an if statement, you know that there's some clause that precedes it or follows it that is necessary in order to make the sentence complete. A subordinate clause contains a subject and a verb, but don't make a complete thought. There we go. So here's an example. If we're going out of town, we need to pack. Where is the dependent clause in this sentence? Right. Tell me why. Yes. What is it called?
Oh, subordinate.
There you go. You gotta sound really smart when you talk about, oh, there's the subordinate clause. It's if. Yes. And so, what else do you notice about that phrase? If, yeah, just the phrase. If we're going out of town, it has a subject and a verb, but it's incomplete because a sentence has a subject and a verb and forms a complete thought. So it only has two of the three. If I said, if we're going out of town, you'd be like, if we're going out of town, what? Right? I didn't finish, right? So you need more information in order for the thought to be complete. So if you were to take that phrase out, you would be able to identify what is the actual sentence here. We need to pack. So at that point, you can just look at whether or not there's any issue with your sentence, even if you were to pull out that modifying phrase. All right. Now, you also want to make sure your modifying phrase makes sense with the rest of the sentence too. So think about when we talk about something modifying, we're talking about what is this cluster of words pointing to or speaking about specifically. Okay, so when you hear that phrase modifying, and then what does that modify? You ask yourself, what is the meaning of this phrase and to what is it pointing in this sentence? And if there's a problem there, then you'll know what you need to do. So let's talk about how we might identify, if we were to pull out the prepositional phrase or the subordinate clause, then would we be able to identify or fix our fragments, run-on, or run-on sentences? So here's another great place where you can go to look at how to identify run-on sentences. And within the University of North Carolina's Writing Center page here, they have a suggestion for how we might fix run-ons. So what's a run-on? A run-on is when you have more than one sentence, subject, verb, forming a complete thought, joined together as one without any punctuation to separate them. And so here's the example they have. They're also called fused sentences. And here's the example. My favorite Mediterranean spread is hummus and it's very garlicky. So this one sentence actually contains two ideas, right? What are the two ideas? Not everybody all at once. My favorite Mediterranean spread is hummus. One idea, subject, verb, forms a complete thought. It is very garlicky. It is very garlicky. Either of those could stand alone as a sentence. Yeah. So if you put them together without any punctuation, it's a runoff. Yeah. All right. So they talk about how to fix it. We're going to talk about that in a little while. But here is what they suggest you might do to test whether you have a run-on sentence. They suggest turning your sentences into yes/no questions and or turn your sentences into tag questions that end with a questioning phrase at the end. So for example, my favorite Mediterranean spread is hummus. If you were to turn this into a question, you would say, is my favorite Mediterranean spread hummus? Yes or no, you can answer that, right? If you turn it into a tag question, you would say, my favorite Mediterranean spread is hummus, isn't it? It works. However, if you try to do it with the original sentence, which was, my favorite Mediterranean spread is hummus, it is very garlicky, you would find that if you try to turn it to a question, it would end up being two questions. Is my favorite Mediterranean spread hummus? Is it very garlicky? You kind of have to ask it as two questions because it's two ideas. And so that's how you know if they can't be joined together as one. Is my favorite Mediterranean spread? Is it very garlicky? My favorite Mediterranean spread is hummus, isn't it? It's very garlicky, isn't it? You kind of have to, again, ask the tag question by separating the two. It wouldn't sound right if you said, my favorite Mediterranean spread is hummus, it is very garlicky, isn't it? You feel like, yeah, you're like saying a whole lot there. Can you break that down? And if you feel that when you read a sentence, as you're trying to turn it into a question, that's a sign that it should probably be separated into two sentences in some way. And we're going to talk about how we fix that. Another way to identify a problem is to identify the gerund. So we talked about basically taking any of our sentences and pulling out the prepositional phrases, pulling out if there's any dependent clauses. We also want to look and see if there are any gerunds. Now, gerund is another one of those words you're going to sound real smart if you talk about because nobody knows what a gerund is. Anybody know what a gerund is? Raise your hand if you know what a gerund is. I'll be real impressed. Yeah, I didn't think so. All right, so now you will, right? It's a phrase beginning with ing, with an ing verb that functions as a noun. Now, that's a real simple explanation of a gerund. It's a little more complicated than that in its actual function. We probably should do a whole workshop just on gerunds, but we're not. The main point is you want to recognize the ing verbs and see whether they are functioning in the sentence as gerunds or participles because they may also impact what's going on in the sentence. A participle is a verb in continuous form, such as the kids were playing in the street. Or it can act as an adjective. It was such a boring flight. So it's a verb with an ing form that is functioning in this case as an adjective. That's a participle, which is similar to a gerund because it's a verb with an ing and it functions in a different way from the typical verb, from the way a typical verb would. Don't worry, you don't have to necessarily remember all of that other than to recognize the ing form of the verb and see whether it is functioning in the sentence as a header to a phrase. In the same way we had the preposition or we had the dependent clause, they begin with those markers. Gerunds are those ing verbs that can also begin, be part of a phrase that will alter the meaning if it's not done correctly. So, for example, after having danced all night, it was late and no restaurants were open. So we see we have an ing verb here, having, right? It is part of a prepositional phrase because we see we have a preposition here, right? I'll remember what the prepositions are, right? After having danced all night. So it is part of a prepositional phrase. And the question is, who or what is it modifying? If we pulled out that phrase, we would be left with, it was late and no restaurants were open, right? The sentence, it was late and no restaurants were open. So the question is, after having danced all night is a phrase that has to point to something in this sentence. What is it pointing to? Any idea? Huh? So it's talking about dance. Somebody danced. So what's the subject? We said the subject was it. So did it dance? Is that what we're saying in the sentence? No. So when we have a situation like this where we have a phrase that is modifying something that is actually not present, it's called a dangling modifier. Actually, it's a missing modifier because we don't even have it named at all. A dangling one would be it's somewhere too far away for you to connect the two. But in this case, we have no idea who was dancing all night because we didn't name the subject of that action, right? So right there, because we are not able to connect this phrase in the way that we were in the other example with something directly named in the sentence, we know there's a problem that has to be fixed. Do we have any idea how, based on what you think the meaning of this sentence is, how do you think you might fix it? It was late because we danced all night. Yeah, at least in that you know. So you need to reword it so that we have a subject who was doing the dancing. We dance all night. In this one, there is no we named, right? So yeah, you've got to reword it, and there's different ways that you can do that in order to fix the problem. So walking down the street, the sky was a brilliant blue. What's the subject of this sentence? Sky. And what's the verb? The sky was walking. Really? That's amazing. Have you ever seen that? I haven't. But we said if we have an ing verb that's part of a phrase, we want to look to see if it's part of a phrase, which it is, walking down the street. We need to pull that out and look at whether it is modifying or pointing to something directly in the sentence which is left. We know the sky is the subject. What is the verb of that sentence then? What is blue? Blue is an adjective. An adjective is a word that describes. What is a verb? A verb is a word that shows action or state of being. So, what's the verb in this sentence? Was. What was? The sky. The sky was what? The sky was walking. Amazing. I still don't know how that's possible. What is the sky? Huh? It was blue. The sky was blue, right? Blue describes the sky. So how is walking down the street a part of that? What's the relationship? Yeah, we don't have anybody walking because the sky can't walk, in spite of what my friend over here keeps saying. So how would we fix this sentence? Yeah, now we have a person who notices the sky that is blue. But as it is, it doesn't make any sense, right? So we pull out that phrase with the ing verb. We can see what the actual sentence is talking about and determine where the meaning is disrupted. All right, so let's talk about how to fix a sentence. There's one of three ways to fix sentences, particularly when we have run-ons or fragments. When we have a subject and a verb that forms a complete thought, we need to end it before we mess ourselves up. End it with a period, a comma with a coordinating conjunction, or a semicolon, that punctuation that everyone is baffled by, the semicolon. We're learning all kind of wonderful things today. I'm going to tell you when to use a semicolon. So first of all, the way to determine, any one of those three ways will fix a run-on sentence. But the question is, when do you decide, how do you decide which one to use? You got to think about the relationship between the two sentences that are currently joined. So our example was the Mediterranean hummus, which was garlicky, right? So the question is, how closely related are those two ideas? And should I use a period which signals a full stop and that a new portion, a related idea, but kind of starting over in a way, is coming after it? So there's a relationship, but it's sort of a new part of the meaning that is being expressed. In that case, you would want to have that full stop, which is the period. It is the hardest break between two ideas. They know what is right. They went back to apologize. Now, if you have two ideas that are closely related, doing a lot of periods is going to make your writing really choppy. Just everything is kind of broken up. So you really do want to think about what the relationship is, because it may be necessary to join them a little more closely. So a semicolon allows you to join ideas that are closely related, but a semicolon is able to, I say it's heavy, it's strong enough to hold up the weight of two complete sentences. A comma is not. A comma never is strong enough to hold up the weight of two sentences. So if you try to join two ideas that are closely connected with a comma, it's called a comma splice. And I think of it as you're breaking the comma in half. It's not strong enough to hold it up, right? But a semicolon indicates a stop, but it also indicates that the two ideas are closely connected, even though they are complete sentences that could stand alone. So you might say, they know what is right. They've been taught from a young age. So they've been taught from a young age, sort of a continuation of the thought that was expressed in the first part. And it's not maybe necessary to break them so abruptly. Your question? Not usually. It depends on the context and why you would change tenses. So we need the context of what you were saying. They know what is right, and because they know what is right, they went back to apologize, right? So in this case, there may be, if we were to see the whole context of the statement, there may be a need to switch tenses. Yeah. Right. Did you have to say? Oh, I thought you were commenting on that. Yeah. So the problem with doing these sentences that are just sort of in a vacuum is that you need the whole context in order to understand why we would switch tenses in this case. My thinking is that based on what they know, it informed what they did in that moment that I'm describing. And so in that case, it's justified. So yeah, in both of those examples, it's sort of this present knowledge that informs past behavior. So that's the reason for it. Okay, so if we wanted to join the two ideas in another way, we might use what's called a coordinating conjunction. Coordinating conjunctions have very specific ways of showing, they each show a specific relationship between the two ideas. So in this case, they know what is right, but they just don't want to do it. The but is a negation of what was said before. So in spite of what they know, they did something else. They know what is right, and they have been taught. We're talking about two ideas that are balanced. This and this, they are equal. They know what is right, so they do as they are told. So as a result of the first thing, that is the relationship to the next thing. So we would use so in that example. Notice that the joining of the two sentences includes a comma, but it can only work if it's joined with one of these, conjunction. And there is an easy way to remember what those conjunctions are. Perhaps you're familiar with fanboys, for, and, or, but, or, yet, and so. These are the only coordinating conjunctions and the only words that can be joined with a comma to combine two complete sentences. Okay? So we would choose which of these to use depending on the relationship of the two ideas. Maybe we don't want a hard stop to separate them because they're close. Maybe the semicolon makes them too close, but one of these might express the idea in just the right way, depending on the point that we're trying to make. All right, so now we get to practice. We have the first activity I'd like for you to look at is the run-on sentence. So everybody grab one, and we have two examples of run-on sentences that we're asking you to try to fix. And let's do that one first, the run-on sentence one, then we'll do the other one. If anyone is watching this video, we will have these exercises uploaded just after the recording of this session. So you'll be able to see the exercises that we're working on. Okay, so everybody do the editing run-on sentences one first, and then we'll talk about how you fixed it. Which one? Oh yeah, two. So remember, there's more than one way to fix a sentence. There's not a right and wrong. As long as you have a subject and verb and it forms a complete thought, you're good. You can make whatever necessary changes. What's the problem? It's definitely a run-on. So tell me, as I read the first part, where the thought is complete and should stop, okay? Tanya studied so hard for her test that she didn't get to sleep at all the night before the test and was exhausted. Don't stop yet. When she showed up to actually take the test. Tanya studied so hard for her test that she didn't get to sleep at all the night before Ah, that seems like a good place to stop. Yeah. Tanya studied so hard for her test, she didn't get to sleep at all the night before. Right? So if I turn it into a question, it works. So we know that's a good place to stop. Okay, so what should the next sentence be? Because what's on the page is the test and was exhausted. So we know we got to fix something there. That's not working. Well, as long as we're still saying what is meant, so how might you say that next part?
Well, in fact, she was so exhausted that
Yeah, that's perfect. The point is still made, it's clear, and you have fixed your comma splice. She was so exhausted, she showed up late to the test and fell asleep at her desk. She was so exhausted, she fell asleep at her desk and dreamed she got an A. Very good. Any questions about that? Or did anyone fix it a different way? Because that's not the only way to fix it. Oh, you did the other one? Okay, we're coming to that. All right, what about the next example? The three dogs do not always get along. One of them has no concept of personal space. Another is very protective about his food. And the third is always demanding all the attention of their owner. She is really clingy, that's why. What's the first main point? Yeah, three dogs do not always get along, period. All right, what's the next point? And the question is, what's the relationship of the others? Because we want to chop up everyone. One of them has no concept of personal space. Another is very protective about his food. We could make those separate sentences. Would there be any reason to join them? Or join any of them? Probably. So how might you join them so it's not choppy? Having a hard time with that one? Let's look at a possible way. Oh, did I not? Oh, you know what? I think I didn't put this one on here. I think I forgot to upload. My fault. All right. Let's see if I can find my. How I did Krishandra or Ariana by any chance do this? Huh? I was wondering if you have an example, if you have your correction that you could share. You said what? Oh, just the first one. Okay, I'm looking for my example. Give me a. Okay, the semicolon.
And of course, the last one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I believe in the last one. But then, I would do one that has the concept of personal space, all of one another.
Okay, so using that dependent clause marker while helps to join two ideas. Mm-hmm.
Third. And that's without.
Right, so now we have to clear that up too. She maybe needs to be named rather than using the pronoun. Okay, that's good. My computer's too slow for me to find my example quickly, so we'll go with your answers. All right, so one of you at least did the other sheet. Did everybody get both sheets already? Okay, so we have in this one, the subject-verb agreement, identifying the subject-verb agreement and the dangling modifiers. And so the first example says, the greatest invention in the world be the computer. How would we fix that? Or did we notice anything there? What's the subject? Let's talk about the verb. What's the verb in that sentence? Invention is a noun, the name of a person, place, or thing. In this case, it would be a thing. The world is also a noun. It's the name of a person, place, or thing. Does not show action or state of being. Correct. It's an adjective, yes. So what word in here shows action or state of being? Be. Yeah. So what is the subject of be? Who or what be? Because the world is the object of the preposition in. We got to pull out that prepositional phrase in order to find the subject and the verb. Remember, the prepositional phrase is always extra. So we have to identify who or what is doing the action or state of being, pull out the prepositional phrase or any dependent clauses, then we can identify the subject. So what is be? What's the subject of the verb be? If we take out in the world, what is the sentence saying is the thing that be? Okay. It's talking about the invention though, right? And the computer is what is complementing the subject, which is the invention. So the invention and the computer are complementing one another, but do you think it would be correct to say that it be? No, what would be the way to say that? The greatest invention is. It is. The greatest invention is the computer. Yes, so the subject is invention, and the object of that is the complement is computer. Not many people realizes that the first computer were actually invented by Charles Babbage in the 19th century. Tell me what the verbs are in that sentence. The words that show action. Realizes. Invented. Is there another verb? Were. Yes, it's acting as a helping verb in this case. Were invented would be the complete verb. So let's talk about who or what realizes in this sentence. The people. So people realizes. Does that sound right to you? People realize, right? So we have a it's not a subject verb, they're not in agreement in this case. If you have a plural subject, then realize without the S is necessary. People realize that the computer were invented. So is there a problem there? We have a who or what were invented? Is that were is a plural verb. It signals that there should be a plural subject. What's the subject of were invented? What's it talking about? Computer, which is singular, right? But the verb is plural, so we don't have agreement. How would we fix that? Was. The first computer was invented by Charles Babbage. All right, next one. At first, computers was only used to calculate complicated math problems. So the verb in that sentence is what? Was used in this case because it's acting as a helping verb. So what was used? Yes, so how would we fix that? Right. So either the first computers were, or the first computer was. I'm not sure if it was one or multiple. All right, good. And then although the first computers was, I think we're getting the idea, right? Sometimes it should be computers were. Sometimes building whole buildings. They is really only useful now because they have gotten smaller. So the verb is, who or what is? They. So how do we fix that? They are only useful now because they have gotten smaller. Good. All right, last one, fix the dangling modifier. Remember what we talked about? Those dependent clause markers, if and when and while and after. So when I went to the beach last Saturday, that a sentence? Why not? That subject and a verb, I went. Yeah, that when says that we need more information. So how can we fix that dangling modifier? I went to the beach last Saturday. Yeah, that's an easy fix. All right, I borrowed an old bathing suit from a friend because I had forgotten to bring my own bathing suit while the waist on my borrowed suit would have been tight on a doll. Any problems there? Yeah, so where would we end it? I borrowed an old bathing suit from a friend because I had forgotten to bring my own bathing suit. That sounds good. Good place to stop. Yeah, I ran out of breath right there, so that worked. Then what? While the waist on my borrowed suit would have been tight on a doll. Yeah, because while makes it dependent on something for meaning. You take the while off, we're okay. Waiting for me to come out, there was a slight altercation. Okay, well, unless there's something missing. What did you say? Yeah, so if we wanted that phrase waiting for me to come out, we need to know who was waiting, because that's not, that person or persons isn't named, right? Yeah. So that's that gerund phrase. Remember that ing verb that we said signals a gerund phrase? And we got to make sure that who or what it is modifying is actually named. After some rude boys came and began to make insulting remarks. That noise. Okay, so what's the problem there? Yeah, after what? So maybe you would fix it how? Just take it up. We're just cutting all of them. Just put some rude boys came and began to make insulting remarks. So what is the function of those dependent clause markers? Do we want to just cut them all? I mean, you can. It still has meaning, but they also function for a purpose at times. So we have to think about, and this is just an example, but if you're writing and you want to talk about at what point something happened or in what way it was connected, you know, if something happens first, then something else can happen, right? While one thing was happening, something else was also happening. So it's not that we necessarily want to get rid of those all the time, but we want to ask ourselves, what am I trying to say here? Do I want to say that while my friends were waiting for me to come out, there was a slight altercation? Maybe, because I want you to know that one thing was happening while something else was happening, right? And after one thing happened, then another thing happened. So the point is not necessarily just to cut them to fix the problem, but to think about the meaning overall and see how we can best express that. So that is really the point of this whole lesson, with finding and identifying errors is that it has to be done within the context of your writing, and it has to be connected to the purpose and the goal that you have. Just going through and technically fixing the errors may fix the errors, but will it alter the meaning or compromise the meaning? That's not what we want, right? So always think about correcting errors in context, because just fixing grammar stuff alone is not necessarily going to make your writing good. Okay? All right, I thank you guys so much for coming out. Of course, we can't cover everything, but you know where to find us, and you know who we are. We're here to help you with any of the things that you may be working on, and we encourage you to come back whenever you have assignments that you need us to work with you. Tomorrow, by the way, I want to mention again, we do have the librarian coming out. If you have research papers that you are either now or will soon need to work on, he is going to show us the resources that are available for us and how we can decipher the best ones for the type of writing that we're doing. So I encourage you to come out, bring a friend, or if you know someone else who needs to be here, definitely let them know where we are. And I thank you all for your attention.